The first time Ethan Cole noticed the smiles, he thought they were accidents, small human misfires that meant nothing. By the last time, he understood they were maps, and he had been standing at the center of a country he never meant to enter. Ethan Cole had built his life on patterns. As a data journalist in Washington, D.C., he believed that if you stared long enough at numbers, they confessed. Trends rose like mountains. Anomalies flickered like distant storms. Lies left fingerprints. He trusted this faith the way other people trusted prayer. So when his editor assigned him to a soft feature story, a profile on a civic tech nonprofit expanding across the Midwest, Ethan felt almost insulted. The nonprofit, Brightline Commons, was run by a former behavioral economist named Clara Hayes. Her resume read like a string of accolades polished to a mirror shine. Stanford, MIT, White House Fellowship, TED Talks that traveled like gospel through LinkedIn feeds. Human angle, his editor said. She's changing how cities share data with citizens. Make it relatable. Relatable had never been Ethan's favorite word, but he booked the flight to Chicago anyway. Clara Hayes greeted him in the lobby of Brightline's headquarters with a smile that landed differently than he expected. It wasn't wide or practiced. It was brief, asymmetrical, like a thought that had decided to reveal itself and then reconsidered. "Ethan Cole," she said, extending her hand. "You're earlier than most journalists." "I like to see places wake up," he replied, surprised at himself. He usually hated small talk. "Then you're in luck," she said, gesturing toward the glass walls where engineers already hunched over screens. "This place doesn't sleep. It naps aggressively." That was the second smile, a quick flash, a private joke she didn't invite him into, but didn't hide either. Caught between those smiles, Ethan felt something unsteady open in him, curiosity sharpened by caution. Brightline Commons occupied a renovated factory on the south branch of the Chicago River, exposed brick, reclaimed wood, whiteboards dense with diagrams that looked like city maps drawn by dreamers. Clara led him through it like a guide who knew every echo. She spoke about transparency platforms, about participatory budgeting tools, about the moral obligation of data to return to the people who produced it. She quoted research casually, but not coldly. Every statistic came with a story. Every policy implication came with a human face. Ethan recorded everything, but he also watched. He watched the way her smile shifted depending on the question. There was the professional smile, measured, inclusive, slightly upward. There was the amused smile, quick, sharp, gone. And there was another one, rarer, that arrived when she spoke about uncertainty. It was softer, almost vulnerable, as if doubt itself had surprised her. That smile unsettled him the most. "Do you ever worry," Ethan asked during their first interview session, "that making data more accessible just gives people more ways to misunderstand it?" Clara leaned back, folding her arms. For a moment, she didn't smile at all. "All the time," she said. "But opacity has never protected democracy. It's only protected power." He nodded, but pressed. "Still, misinformation thrives on fragments. What if openness accelerates harm?" That was when the third smile appeared, the one that felt like a boundary rather than an invitation. "Then our job isn't to hide the fragments," she said, "but to teach people how to assemble them." Ethan wrote that down verbatim. It would quote beautifully. What he didn't write was the sudden awareness that he wanted to test her answers the way he tested data, by pulling at edges, by seeing what held and what tore. Over the next 3 days, Ethan followed Clara through meetings, community forums, late-night brainstorming sessions fueled by coffee and arguments. He watched her charm skeptical city council members, listen to frustrated residents, and challenge her own team when they leaned toward convenience over principle. At night, back in his hotel, Ethan reviewed recordings and notes. He also ran background checks, not because he suspected wrongdoing, but because he always did. Habits were hard to break. That was when the first anomaly surfaced. A funding grant from 5 years ago, large, private, routed through a donor-advised fund that obscured its original source. Not illegal, not even unusual, but odd given Brightline's relentless transparency ethos. Ethan flagged it mentally. One anomaly didn't make a pattern. Yet the next morning, as Clara laughed with a group of interns, Ethan found himself watching her smile again, wondering which version of it knew about the grant. On the fourth day, Clara invited him to dinner. "Strictly off the record," she said, as they walked along the river at dusk. Ethan hesitated. Journalistic boundaries flickered through his mind like warning lights. Then curiosity overruled caution. They ate at a small neighborhood restaurant that smelled like garlic and memory. The conversation drifted away from work. Clara spoke about growing up in Ohio, a mother who taught math at a community college, and a father who fixed elevators. Ethan talked about his early years in Baltimore, about watching his neighborhood change through datasets before he ever understood the people inside them.
You always talk about people as variables, Clara said, smiling, gently this time, even when you're being personal. It's safer, he admitted. For whom? He didn't answer. After dinner, they walked again. The city hummed around them. Streetlights reflected on the river like broken constellations. Can I ask you something off the record? Clara said. Ethan nodded. Why data journalism? She asked, of all the things you could do. He considered lying. The practiced smile hovered in his mind, the one he used in panels and interviews. Instead, he surprised himself. My brother disappeared when I was 16, he said. Everyone had theories. Nobody had facts. I started believing that if I could learn to read patterns, I could stop things from vanishing. Clara stopped walking. Her smile faded entirely. I'm sorry, she said. It was a long time ago, Ethan replied, but some habits don't expire. She nodded slowly, then smiled again, but this one was different. It held something like recognition. Sometimes, she said, we don't choose our tools, we inherit them. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He replayed the conversation, the smiles, the grant anomaly. He opened his laptop and dug deeper. The donor-advised fund linked, indirectly, to a now-defunct analytics fund called Northway Metrics. The name rang faint bells. Ethan searched his own archives. 3 years earlier, he had written a short piece on Northway's collapse after a federal investigation into unethical data modeling. The firm had predicted urban crime spikes that never materialized, predictions that nevertheless influenced policing strategies in several cities. Lives had been affected, trust had been eroded, and now Northway's shadow touched Brightline. Ethan's chest tightened. This was no longer a soft feature. The next morning, Ethan confronted Clara, not aggressively, but directly. I found something, he said, closing her office door behind him, about early funding. Her smile appeared immediately, professional and calm. I assumed you would, she said. You're thorough. That doesn't worry you? It does, she replied, but not for the reasons you think. He waited. The funding you're talking about came from people who wanted to disappear, Clara said. After Northway collapsed, a few of its former executives wanted to atone without being seen. Ethan frowned. By hiding? By redirecting, she said. They funded projects that dismantled the very systems they once built. That's a generous interpretation, Ethan said. Yes, Clara replied softly. It is. The room held silence like a held breath. Why not disclose it? Clara asked. Clara's smile faded. Because people don't believe in transformation, she said. They believe in punishment, and sometimes punishment ends conversations that need to happen. Ethan felt the familiar pull between empathy and skepticism, the space where his best work usually lived. Caught between her smiles, he didn't know which version of Clara he was speaking to, the reformer or the strategist. Ethan extended his stay. What began as a profile turned into an investigation. He interviewed former Northway employees, city officials, community activists. He traced the money, the influence, the outcomes. The picture that emerged was complicated, messy in the way real change often was. Brightline's tools had improved civic engagement measurably. Participation rates were up. Trust surveys showed modest but real gains. At the same time, the moral ambiguity of its origins lingered like a question no one wanted to ask too loudly. Clara remained open, mostly. She answered questions, provided documents, argued her case with passion and patience. And sometimes, late at night in the office kitchen, they argued about philosophy instead. Intent matters, she insisted. Impact matters more, Ethan countered. Without intent, impact is blind. Without accountability, intent is meaningless. Between them, coffee cooled and smiles flickered, sometimes aligning, sometimes colliding. One evening, after a particularly heated debate, Clara surprised him. You should write the whole truth, she said, even the parts that hurt us. Ethan studied her face, searching for strategy. You're serious? Yes, she replied. If we believe in transparency, it can't be conditional. That could cost you donors, he said, partnerships, political goodwill. Her smile returned, the vulnerable one. Then we'll rebuild, she said, again. In that moment, Ethan realized something that unsettled him more than any anomaly. He wanted to protect her. The thought alarmed him. Journalists were not supposed to feel that way. The article took shape slowly. Ethan wrote with care, layering context over accusation, complexity over certainty. He included voices from communities helped by Brightline, and those still wary of its origins. He named the funding source, explained the intent, questioned the ethics. When he sent Clara a final fact-check request, his hands hesitated over the keyboard. She responded within an hour. Thank you for being honest, she wrote, even when it's uncomfortable. No smile, he noticed, just words. The piece published on a Sunday morning.
It spread quickly, shared by policy wonks, debated by activists, dissected on podcasts. Some praised Ethan's nuance, others accused him of going soft. Brightline faced scrutiny, a few partners pulled back, others doubled down. Clara appeared on panels, answering questions with composure. Her smiles, Ethan noticed from afar, had changed. They were rarer now, more deliberate. They didn't speak for weeks. When they finally met again, it was in Washington, at a public forum on civic data ethics. Ethan sat in the audience as Clara spoke on stage, fielding tough questions with grace. Afterward, she found him near the exit. "Coffee?" she asked. They walked to a quiet cafe. The city outside buzzed with policy and ambition. "I'm not angry," Clara said, as if reading his mind. "I'm recalibrating." "I understand," I replied. For what it's worth, I didn't enjoy writing it. She smiled, small, tired, real. "I know," she said. "That's why I trusted." They sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid between them. Months passed. Brightline survived, leaner and more transparent than before. Ethan continued his work, chasing patterns, exposing truths. Sometimes he and Clara exchanged emails, articles, studies, occasional jokes. The smiles lived mostly in memory now. One evening, as Ethan reviewed a new data set on civic trust, he noticed something unexpected. In cities where Brightline had weathered controversy openly, trust rebounded faster than in cities where scandals had been buried. The pattern was clear. He smiled to himself, an unguarded one. Years later, at a conference in San Francisco, Ethan and Clara shared a stage, not as subject and journalist, but as collaborators on a panel about accountability and change. Afterwards, standing by the bay, Clara looked at him and smiled, the kind that held no strategy, no defense. "You were right," she said, "about accountability." Ethan shook his head. "You were right too," he replied, "about intent." They laughed, the sound carried by the wind. Caught between her smiles, Ethan finally understood. Some truths didn't resolve into clean conclusions. They lived in tension, they demand patience, and sometimes, if you were lucky, they smiled back.
The second collapse didn't announce itself with headlines. It came quietly, like a system error that only appeared after midnight. Ethan noticed it first in a data set from St. Louis, civic engagement metrics Brightline had helped implement years earlier. The numbers weren't dropping. They were flattening in a way that defied social logic. Not apathy, not outrage, something else, a kind of emotional stasis. He ran the model again, then again. Different variables, same result. People were participating, but without conviction. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen reflecting off the window of his DC apartment. Outside, the city hummed with late-night certainty. Sirens, traffic, ambition. Inside, a familiar unease settled into his chest. He emailed Clara. She replied the next morning. "I've seen it too," she wrote. "Come to Chicago. We need to talk in person." Brightline Commons felt different now. Leaner, quieter. The walls still held whiteboards, but fewer slogans. More questions. Clara met him upstairs, her hair pulled back tighter than before. The smile she offered was polite, restrained. "We won," she said once they sat down. "Transparency, accountability, all the things we fought for." "And?" Ethan asked. "And we underestimated fatigue," she said. "People don't just want truth, they want relief." She pulled up a dashboard. Participation rates held steady, but sentiment analysis, public comments, town halls, surveys, showed something brittle. "They trust the system," Clara said. "They just don't feel anything anymore." Ethan exhaled slowly. "That's worse than distrust." "Yes," she said, "because you don't protest numbness." They sat with that. The root of the problem, they realized, wasn't Brightline's tools, but how they were being used. Cities had learned to optimize for engagement metrics instead of human experience. They gamified participation, smoothed conflict, reduced friction so efficiently that disagreement lost its weight. Democracy, Ethan thought, had been rendered user-friendly to the point of emotional emptiness. "This is on me," Clara said one evening, staring at the city lights from her office window. "I believed that better systems would make better citizens." "And?" Ethan asked. "And systems don't teach people how to care," she replied. "They just teach them how to comply." Ethan watched her face as she said it. No smile, just clarity. The reckoning came faster than expected. A coalition of community groups published an open letter criticizing Brightline, not for corruption, but for overreach, for unintentionally sanitizing civic struggle, for turning participation into a checkbox rather than a confrontation. The media picked it up. The tone was different this time. Less outrage, more disappointment. That hurt more. Clara was invited, then uninvited, from 2 major conferences. A federal partnership paused pending review. Brightline's board panicked. They wanted a rebrand, new messaging, softer language. Clara listened, then she shook her head. "No," she said. "We're not going to smile our way out of this." Some board members stared at her like she'd spoken heresy. Ethan sat in the back of the room, silent, observing, always observing. "What do you propose?" one member asked. Clara looked at Ethan. "We break the system," she said.
What followed was the most radical thing Brightline had ever done. They published everything. Not just code and funding, but internal debates, failed pilots, arguments, doubts, emails where Clara herself questioned the entire premise of data-driven civic engagement. They released a public archive titled What We Got Wrong. No filters, no framing. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some called it courageous, others called it reckless. A few cities terminated contracts overnight. But something else happened too. People argued again. Not in neat comment boxes, but in messy town halls. Protests formed, not against Brightline alone, but against systems that promised ease where struggle was necessary. Engagement didn't just spike, it fractured, and then it deepened. Ethan watched the data roll in, stunned. The numbness broke. Late one night, Ethan and Clara sat alone in the Brightline kitchen. The building was nearly empty. The hum of servers filled the silence. "I think this is where I step back," Clara said quietly. Ethan turned to her. "From Brightline?" "From leading," she said. "This organization can't grow if it keeps orbiting my certainty." He studied her face. The lines around her eyes were deeper now, earned. "You don't have to disappear," he said. She smiled then, not the professional one, not the strategic one. The rare, unguarded smile that had first unsettled him years ago. "I know," she said, "but I do have to change." Clara resigned as CEO 3 months later. The announcement shocked the policy world. Speculation followed. Burnout, pressure, scandal. None of it fully captured the truth. Ethan wrote nothing about it. Instead, he began a long-form project, not an exposé, not a profile, something else. A study of how systems shape emotion, how transparency without vulnerability becomes sterile, how democracy requires not just access, but friction. He interviewed Clara once, for the record this time. "Do you regret it?" he asked her, recorder between them. She thought for a long moment. "I regret believing I could engineer trust," she said. "Trust isn't built, it's practiced." "And the smiles?" Ethan asked, before he could stop himself. She laughed softly. "They were never a strategy," she said. "They were pauses, moments where I hadn't decided who I needed to be yet." Ethan smiled at that, fully, finally. The project published a year later as a book, caught between her smiles. It defied genre, part memoir, part investigation, part philosophical reckoning. It was taught in journalism schools, debated in policy circles, criticized for being too human, praised for refusing clean answers. Clara didn't attend the launch. She sent Ethan a note instead. "Some stories are finished only when they stop belonging to us." Years passed. Ethan aged into a quieter authority. He taught now, mentored younger journalists who believed truth was a weapon rather than a responsibility. He corrected them gently. Clara moved west, consulted selectively, worked with communities, not institutions. She avoided stages. They spoke occasionally, never nostalgically. One autumn afternoon, they met by chance in San Francisco. Near the water, the air sharp with salt and memory. They walked without agenda. "You know, for a long time I thought you were trying to catch me," Clara said, smiling into the wind. He shook his head. "I was trying to understand the space between things." "The space between smiles?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "That's where the truth was." She stopped walking, looked at him. "And did you find it?" Ethan considered the question. The years, the data, the arguments, the silences. "I found something better," he said. "I found the courage to stay uncertain." Clara smiled then. No armor, no pause. "So did I," she said. They stood there, watching the water move without pattern, without promise. And for the first time, neither of them needed to measure it.